In Ecuador, after 14 days of national strike, protests against Guillermo Lazo's government continue. U.S. President Joe Biden signed a gun control bill into law amid the escalating scourge of gun violence in the country. In Ukraine, authorities of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Lugansk reported the occupation of the Azot chemical plant in the city of Severodonetsk. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Ecuador, after 14 days of national strike, protests against Guillermo Lazo's government continue. The farmers' movements and different social groups remain gathered in the surroundings of the National Assembly in Quito, in spite of racist acts against them by authorities and the constant police repression that has many injured. Demonstrators continue to demand the removal of President Guillermo Lazo. Indigenous movements also denounce human rights violations by members of the police and armed forces. Authorities of the Confederations of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador reiterate that the protests will continue until the demands are met. In Ecuador, members of Humanitarian and Human Rights International Mission denounced at a press conference the capture of hundreds of people in the middle of the social mobilizations that have taken place in the country.
There are hundreds of arrests. There are 7 disappearances, and also as a result of the attack against the social mobilization in general, there are several missing children whose mothers cannot find them due to the clashes developed in the mobilizations after the tear gas was thrown at peaceful demonstrations.
Leonidas Issa, leader of the Confederations of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador, Issa denies President Guillermo Lazo's claim that protesters have attempted a coup d'etat.
The people didn't come here to do what you're saying. We have come here with our 10 demands so we can bring peace home to our families. We're not going anywhere. We're here. We need to solve the most urgent problems of this country. President of the Republic. Instead of receiving the result, we have received an absolutely violent attack by the armed forces and the national police, an attack on all our organizational structures. In practice, what progress has been made has been nullified, President of the Republic.
In Ecuador, the parliament postponed the decision on the impeachment of President Guillermo Lazo while the executive lifted the state of emergency. Ecuador's National Assembly started a debate on the impeachment of the president presented by a group of assembly members of the Union for Hope party. After 8 hours, the debate was suspended until Sunday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon local time. Also, President Lazo announced his decision to repeal the state of emergency in force in 6 provinces of the country since last June 20th. These announcements were made after the executive carried out a dialogue with the social sector that are protesting against the price increases, actions that, according to the social movements, will continue on Sunday for the 14th day in a row. The government of Honduras freezed fuel prices for 4 weeks to prevent the impact on public transportation and other services. According to the provisional manager of the National Electricity Company, Eric Tejada, the measure was taken by mandate of President Xiomara Castro. Tejada remarked that the government will lose some over $5 million, over $4 million on diesel and little over $1 million on regular gasoline as a result of the current trends in the cost of fuel. With this measure, the price of 1 gallon of 3.8 liters of gasoline will remain at $5.18 and the price of diesel will remain at $5.10. In Brazil, the landless rural workers movement is holding the 19th agroecological event in the city of Curitiba, capital of the state of Paraná. This agroecological fair will run for 5 days, and producers will present everything they have carried out during the last year. In particular, they will show the results of their works with donations that were delivered to the most vulnerable families in the country, among them those who were greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic with difficulties to cope with food and economic crisis that the country is going through. According to reports, about 43 million people in Brazil are currently living under food insecurity in the country, that is more than half of the Brazilian population. In this sense, the national coordinator of the movement, João Pedro Estadil, highlighted the importance of the agroecological journey to get the population out of hunger.
This year's event will have a much greater weight to raise awareness among the people of the city that only agrarian reforms and family farming can overcome the hunger of the Brazilian people.
The handover process between the administration of President Ivan Duque and President-elect Gustavo Petro has begun. Academics point out that the president of the historical pact received the country in debt and an inflation that will continue to rise. From Bogota, tell us more about this issue.
For Jorge Spitia, a researcher at the National University's Fiscal Policy Center, the administration of Gustavo Petro is receiving the country in one of the worst economic crises ever.
The level of poverty and vulnerability in the Colombian population, 73% in 2021, and with the inflation level that we are having, close to 30% in food. He needs to focus on a social program that reactivates the population that are in poverty and vulnerability, and that will have an impact on economic growth.
One of the key issues of the first meeting between the commissions of President Ivan Duque and President-elect Gustavo Petro will be related to the country's economy.
I am pleased to formally deliver to the President-elect the medium-term fiscal framework that includes the most important figures of our country's finances, of our nation states of financing.
The Central Unitarian Workers Union indicates that ongoing President Ivan Duque leaves one of the highest unemployment rates in the country.
We have unemployment rates bordering 10% labor informality, 62% of the economically active population unemployment, particularly hits young people and women.
Citizens in the streets claim that the cost of living in Colombia has skyrocketed and that as a consequence, today over 21 million Colombians are in extreme poverty.
And all the product, it went up because meat is on the high side. I cannot eat meat anymore. I must eat fried eggs. It's the cheapest thing. It's the only thing you can eat when you're poor. No.
The market and all that has risen a lot, and I think that has affected Colombians too much. The truth is a little difficult because things are becoming more and more expensive. Next Wednesday, the joint commissions will meet again to discuss issues such as the Bogota subway, Hydrotuango, peace, and the hunger crisis.
Viviana Bello, TeleSUR Bogotá, Colombia.
We are taking a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. U.S. President Joe Biden signed a gun control bill into law about the escalating scourge of gun violence in that country. The document signed by Biden was approved by the upper house with a margin of 234 votes in favor and 193 against, and by the Senate with some 65 votes in favor and some 33 against. The new Safer Communities Act will allocate an amount of $13 billion to combat gun control insecurity. This amount includes some $750 million in aid to implement and execute red alert and other intervention programs. The bill also improves record checks for firearm purchasers under 21 and limits firearm possession by convicted domestic abusers. The legislation comes in the wake of the wave of gun violence that has affected several cities in the United States in the last few weeks. Also in the U.S., citizens protested in several cities against Supreme Court ruling to outlaw abortion rights. The main protest took place in the cities of Washington, D.C. and New York, where demonstrators chanted slogans against the court Protesters have taken over landmarks across the country, including Philadelphia City Hall and the federal courthouse in Austin, Texas, to make their disagreement with the Supreme Court's decision known. The court's ruling bans abortion in 9 northern states: Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Utah, and Wisconsin. Most of the demonstrations were peaceful. However, altercations were reported in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Phoenix, Arizona. Oslo Saturday morning revealed the shocking scenario of a crime against the LGBT community. People in Oslo laid flowers and rainbow flags on the streets where a deadly shooting took place in the early hours of Saturday in a gay club, a day prior to the Pride March, which has now been called off. 2 people were killed and 21 wounded after the shooting started around 1 a.m. in 3 locations in central Oslo. Police arrested a suspect, a 42-year-old Norwegian man of Iranian descent. In Spain, 4 days ahead of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization summit in Madrid, hundreds of military personnel demonstrated in the streets of the capital city demanding their profession to be dignified. Under the slogans Robles, listen, open the piggy bank, or our families don't eat with the good words, groups of soldiers walked through the streets of the center of Madrid, organized by the trade associations as FASPRO, ATME, and UMT. Demonstrators protested against holding the NATO summit in Madrid. At the same time, they demanded a substantial improvement in their salaries and job stability for temporary soldiers who must retire at the age of 45. As part of their demands, military groups recalled that army personnel are obliged to die and kill if necessary in the fulfillment of their mission, a circumstance which is not required of any other civilian, and for which they should be compensated at the end of the month. In Ukraine, authorities of the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Luhansk reported the occupation of the Azot chemical plant in the city of Severodonetsk. Withdrawal from Severodonetsk will be the biggest setback for Ukraine since the loss of the southern port of Mariupol. Azot is a major industrial center, accounting for 22.18% of the total industrial output of the Oblast region, with 32 large industrial enterprises and 1,200 private enterprises. It is one of the largest chemical plants in Europe. The latest Russian advances seem to bring the Kremlin closer to total control of Lugansk, one of the objectives of the operation declared by Moscow, and pave the way for the twin city of Lysychansk to become the next main focus of the battles. In Russia, the Ministry of Defense reported the neutralization of about 80 Polish mercenaries and enemy weapon systems operating in the Donbass. Defense Ministry spokesman Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov, during his daily briefing, reported that the Russian Air Force attacked a zinc factory in the Donbass. The spokesman also said that about 20 armored vehicles and 8 Grad multiple rocket launchers were destroyed in the town of Konstantinovka. Konashenkov added that other strikes were carried out in other areas of the region, immobilizing artillery pieces, drones, and military personnel. The Russian defense spokesman also noted that the nation's forces intercepted a Toshkayu ballistic missile in the air near the town of Molodiyosnye in southern Ukraine. The President of Moldova, Maya Sandu, stated that food security in her country is at risk given the situation in Ukraine, which prevents grain imports. The President pointed out that this causes an increase in the prices of the national and international market and leads to food shortages, a situation for which Kiev and its allies blame Russia. Moscow, however, rejects these accusations and claims that maritime food exports from Ukraine are paralyzed because Kiev's forces mine the country's ports. Meanwhile, Dmitry Medvedev, Vice President of Russia's Security Council, denounced the plans of Moldova to join the anti-Russian sanctions and warned that his country's reaction will be immediate after Sandu assured his country's willingness to pay any political price in exchange for joining the European Union. And we have more news coming up after the final short break, so don't go away. Welcome back from the South. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi welcomes Iraqi Prime Minister Mustafa al-Kadhimi during
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world,